The Brooklyn Nets land Goran Dragic on the buyout market and win another midseason move. It all comes up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Oh, yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Marmbrecht. He's Doug Norrie. And guess what, my friends? We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. As Doug, the Nets do what they like to do, which is win the buyout market and improve their team for a playoff run.
Yeah, dude, they did it again. By the way, kudos to the Nets. I'm already itching for basketball. The All-Star break for me was just not enough. I try desperately to get excited about it, and I'm irrationally excited about it in the moment, and then I kind of peter off.
Didn't do it for you.
I watched everything, but just my excitement level never matches the anticipation for me. That's right. Like sort of where I end up landing. Because I'm like, they missed every dunk and whatever. No, but this was such a. We're going to talk most of this episode about Dragic here, and sort of about like from the Nets on a high level around what they continue to be able to do. And Dragic is just another example of a buyout guy that many other championship level contending teams would love to add to their team right now, like on a low level contract as a veteran, just almost instant contributor. And the Nets are, for the second season in a row, were just able to do it. They did it last year with Blake Griffin, and they did it last year with LaMarcus Aldridge. I know that Aldridge, for circumstances that no one knew, like he had to stop playing, right? Blake obviously ended up being a huge piece. The Dragic thing, I don't want to make it sound like they're getting, peak, peak Steph Curry here, like as part of a deal, but getting a real professional who has a set of skills that the Nets kind of desperately need. It's just another win for Marks and company. They did it again. Nash too, because it was clear that Nash was a big part of this process, but which we'll talk about. But yeah, like you can't look at this from anything else as from a Nets perspective as being anything short of an A+. Like they just did it again. They are a destination that these guys, professionals that want to win, want to land, and they just done it 2 seasons in a row now, and it's just a testament to what the Nets have built.
And I got to say, because we talked about it leading up to the buyout market and seeing, a lot of fans and anyone in general was saying, well, any team, not just the Nets, would want a 3-and-D wing, and everybody wants those, and not a lot of them exist. So then you start to look at just, well, who are the best players available on the buyout market? And you mentioned it, all the other teams, Chicago is in the mix, the Clippers, the Lakers were pushing for them.
The Bucks.
Yeah, the Bucks were the big one that I talked about last episode, where I thought, I mean, listen, the Nets are not in the same position that they were last year at the buyout market, where it just felt like, hey, we're really moving along here. You want to be a part of this championship run, easy to jump onto these proverbial coattails and ride your way there. So there's a lot of reasons why you end up at that point. But this is also, to me, at least to some extent, the contrast of one player, not to dwell on any of this stuff around the James Harden trade, but it's this contrast of what we've said. Culture and the way organizations want to be run, it can all be relatively cliche. You're trying to land superstars, but everybody minus James Harden seems to regard, I guess you can put Paul Millsap in that group, seems to regard their experience with the Brooklyn Nets as top to bottom. They know how to do things, the facility, the way Sean Marks handles situations, the way Steve Nash has interacted with all the players. Like everyone seems to agree this is a really great team to come and play for. So even in spite of maybe being able to look at some of the other options and say, I might be better off going to Team X, going to the Bucks, they still land on it here. And there's obviously personal connections in behind Dragic's decision potentially, but it looks like the Nets' status as being one of the best run organizations remains well intact. And I don't know if I'm overstating by being able to land Dragic on this buyout market, overstating that point, but it feels like it's still relevant because there's plenty of other teams he could have gone to. And the Nets are right now, we know where they are in the standings, right? It's going to be a heavy lift integrating all these pieces. And yet he ends up on the Nets.
You're not overstating it because it's just another example of it, right? Like this is another example of this team landing a guy who was not really favored to go to the situation. Think back to the Aldridge situation from last year. He was going to Miami. Like that was basically a done deal. It was a done deal that he was going to go to Miami until sort of at the very last second, it was just announced, oh, he's signing with the Nets. Like sort of like what felt like out of nowhere. Now, I know he didn't play that much, but if you just look at the context of the situation, that's exactly what happened. This is a little different with Dragic because we had a news cycle like ahead of this that had said Nash had met with him and had made a pitch for him to be able to come. They have a history together dating back to Phoenix. I know you talked about that. Like, so there's like something, there's a connection there between them. But here's the thing. Like when we talk about organizationally, I know the Nets fans have have wanted to do nothing but just kill Nash all season for like the in-game stuff. I get it. Like there's been some questionable stuff, the rotations. I'm here for it. I can hear it. We've been critical of him, maybe not as much as other people, but we've definitely had our issues. This is another example of like why sometimes this other stuff can trump the in-game stuff. It's like because the macro level things, like Steve Nash going and pitching ex-teammate Goran Dragic. Again, is it kind of lucky that Dragic was on the buyout market and they used to play together? Sure, but Nash has a cachet within the NBA circles that a lot of other coaches simply can't match, right?
Yeah.
Like he's an absolute legend. He is a guy that a lot of guys, especially guards, like looked up to as they were coming up, like, you know, when in their younger days. Again, he's an all-timer. And when he goes and tells you that, you know, you're going to play for him and like that means something. Like there's a reason they brought him in with no coaching experience. And so this is just what you get as part like of an organization. You were able to go into a situation and yeah, like are the Nets actually even the most attractive team to a guy like Goran Dragic? I mean, their championship odds would say they're not. Like they've fallen. Like their playoff percentage of chance of even making the playoffs is lower than any of these other teams. Like this can go wrong in a lot of ways, but the Nets just they carry themselves as an organization that kind of just does on this level, does everything right. And that just definitely continues to pay off in these moves because the moves they make are almost all correct. Now, how it plays out has been weird at times, but the way we evaluate their moves in the moment, we almost always give it an A+ in the moment. And this is another example.
And it's funny too, because we're gonna get into specifically to Dragic and his game and what he can bring to the team here in a second. But on the point about Steve Nash, there's a difference between, you know, Jason Kidd probably falls into this category. Now he had difficulty early on in his coaching career, but like a guy like Ty Lue came to mind, where he was an NBA player. But when you talk to Steve Nash, he played at the highest possible level in the NBA, and he's still close enough where there's plenty of guys, including Dragic, that are in the league that overlapped with Steve Nash and his time there. So it feels like, especially when you go to a pitch on a meeting like this, you say, I'm still talking relative to how the game is getting played right now, right?
Hey, old friend Goran, or you say, hey, old friend Goran Dragic. Not like, hey, I'm Steve Nash. Like these guys used to sit next together. If you read some of the reporting, they would sit next together on the plane. Like Dragic was like elated that he was going to go play with Nash early in their career.
And now, first 3 seasons there before he ended up ultimately trade a couple places. Phoenix bounced around a little bit. But so I just think that the relatability is obviously still relevant. And you can say whatever you want again about the on the court stuff, but when we talk about getting in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, whatever comments get made, and we understand superstars are going to run some things themselves on the court, so to speak, but you've seen it on the sidelines. Kevin Durant has lengthy conversations in between plays with Steve Nash. Like there's clearly a perspective there from what will be a Hall of Fame point guard in the NBA saying, this is what I'm seeing out there. And it was probably a very easy lift to stand there with Dragic and tell him, this is what I'm seeing. If you come to this team, here's how you're going to fit in. Here's the role you can fill. And this is why it's a great landing spot for you. And I think at that point too, with the longstanding connection, Dragic also gets to probably lean back on some sense in himself of, I've always trusted Steve Nash around his opinion on how I make my game better, on how the league is going, on how I can best fit in different circumstances and situations. So it is a little luck pot, like you said, maybe. But guess what? Steve Nash could have walked in there and bumbled over himself, and Dragic could have come out going, I think the Bucks are probably they're on.
I mean, this situation, like I said, this situation itself is lucky, but we have examples that from other things where he didn't have didn't have personal connections. I mean, maybe Marks and Aldridge and like the Spurs thing. Like there are other things, right? Like, but this is just what happens when you're a well-run organization. You increase your ability to be lucky. Like this is what people often don't understand about luck. Like you can increase your chances of being lucky by just having good decision-making processes early. Like
Steve Nash coaching the Orlando Magic, pitching Dragic feels a little different. If they have everything's apples to apples and they have that record, you go, Yeah, I guess, Steve, but I'm looking around here. It doesn't
Well,
exactly
like
seem like it
this,
fits.
this is why he got. This is one of the reasons he got hired. Was the
Yeah.
name was the name brand value. All right, we're gonna talk a little bit more about Dragic, what he's gonna hopefully bring to the team as he gets integrated with the Nets. First, got to talk to our friends over at BetOnline. Football's over. This is a rough Sunday for the Dougster. I really realized how much I needed football in my life, but BetOnline's got you covered for everything else as we go forward. Basketball about to pick back up. Pro and college hoops. March Madness right around the corner. All the latest odds, totals, player performance, props. Maybe where the next coach is going to get fired or is going to land. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Not just basketball, like we said. Go get hockey, boxing, UFC fight nights. Olympics are over now, but we got some more stuff coming down. Maybe baseball will eventually come back. Head on over to the website today. Use your mobile device for a computer. Learn more about the trends in action. Bet online where the game starts.
So, of course, as we say, now focusing more in on the player himself and what he's going to bring to the Brooklyn Nets when he steps on the court. The first impact here, I just think you look at the numbers, which he's a career 15-5 kind of guy. From the field, it's dropped a little bit. I think he's slowed down as far as his ability to drive the lane and get at the basket the way he used to once upon a time. But he's been pretty consistent over the last handful of seasons as a player that can knock down 36, 37 from beyond the arc, and also it gives you 20. You're looking at 25. 25 minutes is probably where you want to mark this guy in at. If we talk about other players on the Nets like Patty Mills and saying over 30 is too much from a minute standpoint, Dragic has a couple more years on him and certainly maybe some more significant miles from that standpoint. What is your biggest impact point that Dragic brings to the team? Because to me, maybe it's very simply he's a ball handler. He's a pure point guard first, and it's something that even though you have all these guards on the roster, you do lack that specific area that he can bring to them.
Yeah, look, it's a little bit of a Kyrie Irving hedge here about like whether or not the vaccine mandate gets rolled back. It's like every new day with that, it seems like it's going to happen and then kind of it doesn't. So like I think there's still very much in a wait and see piece around that. Like bringing Ben Simmons in is a guy who can handle the ball, but he cannot do the things that like Dragic can do. I don't want to go nuts here. Dragic is 35. Like the playing time stuff has not been immensely robust over the last couple of seasons. He's a guy on like the tail end of his career, but he definitely has the ability. He can work into the mid range a little bit. He's very methodical in the way that he plays. Like he can turn the corner still on pick and roll stuff. If he needs to, there's a catch and shoot ability to his game that will benefit like that. You would be able to keep him on the court still as like sort of a moderate floor spacer. Even if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, like that's an important piece for the Nets, like to have like at this point, basically once you add Ben Simmons back into the group, kind of everyone else needs to be able to shoot. Like if it's like Ben Simmons and Andre Drummond, like and everybody else in the court needs to be able to shoot. Like you can't. That's it. Like you've given up you've given up guys who can't shoot on the team. Like when I'm not saying Drummond's gonna like close big games or anything, but even Simmons alone, like he's just not a shooter. So like at that point, you just need guys who can space the floor. And you would like because we've seen the Nets be very very deficient in this at times is on ball creators that can like sort of make their own offense if you get kind of like pot stuck at the end of a shot clock or something.
Sure.
Like we've seen too many possessions of the Nets this year where when there's no Kyrie and KD or Hart, like they just don't have after those guys, they don't have any other guys like this. Seth Curry added a little bit of this, like to like where he's able to get his own shot off at mostly 3 levels. Dragic will add a little bit of this. If he's going to play like 24 minutes a game at the peak, I feel like that's like going to probably be the most that we see from him. That even feels probably really, really high, but he adds a layer to their offense because they've made a commitment now. They're like, we're going pretty much all offense. Like we are going at our peak, at our full health. We are going to try to out offense you with just enough defenders to get by. Right. Like he adds into that. He's a part of that equation. So, I mean, we can talk a little bit more about his game, but in general, like that's what I see as them wanting to add. They're like, our offense is predicated on guys who kind of like need to at times get their own shots in this thing and be enough that you can't like opposing defenses can't help off you to be able to, really blitz Kyrie, really get a like double team KD. Like there needs to be enough other stuff guys to keep him honest, and he's just one of those guys.
all that lane clogging action that we saw so much over the start of this season, where it
Right.
just felt like, hey, all of a sudden everything looks really congested and we don't have outlets or opportunities. Well, I want to think about the rotations and where he fits into that. But the other piece is, you mentioned the Nets going all offense here, or, primarily, and then trying to fit those pieces in. I think the short-term value and hedging around the Kyrie situation. We talk about, we still don't know when Katie's going to get back out there. Simmons, it looks like his timeline is closer than further away, but we're waiting for those guys to return. I think that you can also look at this as like the burst value of bringing in incredibly fresh legs, wasn't playing in Toronto, to say, even if over the next 10 games it takes you from 3-7 to 5-5, whatever the value may
Yep.
be. And I'm not saying that
Which is
Dragic on
really
his
matters for them, by the way, at this point. Like that, like sorry to interrupt, but
100%, right?
like
And
that, like the difference in wins like that. The Nets are at the danger point here. Like they need to make small gains along these margins.
I'm not saying that he by himself gets you 2 extra
Sure.
wins, but combined with Seth Curry and combined with how Patty Mills benefits from having Seth Curry and now Goran Dragic, right? The way everybody collectively benefits from one another. Like, that's what I think is as important as anything, is if Dragic can steal you a win or two before you get everyone on the court and healthy together, that's worth it, because it keeps you in that little spot there. And we've heard a lot of Nets fans around Twitter and talking about what are the expectations with how excited they are about adding Ben Simmons and Katie getting back healthy and all these people. It's great. But I stand by the fact that adding a guy like Dragic and everything else he did in the trade, this is about surviving the regular season and
Yes.
going into the playoff picture and just saying, are we in it? Fine. Now we're going to live with all the results. This is not about, well, they're not too far ahead of you in the standings. Who knows what could happen here? You got to push for these guys to get on the court together. No, this is whenever it happens, it happens. And as long as we're 10th or better, we're going to live with the results after that. And I think that was this move, as well as the trade with Harden and Simmons, was saying, we're not going to sell on this season, but there's a very specific path that we are going to direct ourselves towards to have success this year.
And I think probably a selling point that they sold to Dragic was like, hey, look, we're still a team in flux. Like you're going to be important here. Like if you're
Yes.
Milwaukee selling them, it's like, hey, Milwaukee has their starting five. Like you're going to be coming in off the bench, and you might be a little bit of a change of pace guy, but like they're a complete product for the most
Yeah.
part, right? Like the Nets are not. Now that's a little bit of dig on the Nets because it's such a chaotic situation right here that like the whole half the team is new, and no one knows when anyone else can play. So it's like
You're
not
important because we
not
have
great for.
no idea what's going to happen next.
Well, it's like it's absolutely crazy, like the
Yeah.
situation, like the amount of the number of question marks surrounding this team right now is like kind of abhorrent. Like I can't even, it's like I can't even wrap my head around. But
It
like
was important
I'm
for
sure,
Dragic though too. Like he was frustrated, obviously, in Toronto.
yep,
Goes there and immediately is not getting playing time. Like whatever the state of his game is, he wanted to be in a role where he was going to have a significant part in whatever the team was accomplishing. And I think that's, to your point, is as much as the pitch, as much as what he can do right now at this stage of his career. It was that you said 24 minutes made at the peak. Well, at least 20 though. Like you got 20 minutes guaranteed. You're going to get 20 minutes, and you can whatever. I'd be very curious if you were a fly on the wall of what does it mean come playoff time? What is that going to look like? But in the short term, from a Nets perspective, it's like save minutes off of other guys' legs too here. And I
well,
think,
almost like no team is going to be able to make a commitment to be able to play him major minute. Like any team that wants him in the
right,
buyout market can't make a major commitment to him in the playoffs because that would just be a lie. Like there are a
right,
lot of these teams that are
yes, 100%.
like a lot of these teams that are sort of like fully formed at this point aren't going to be able to tell them that. I'm sure the Nets didn't say that either. I just actually just think in the short term, it's like, hey, you're going to have a major role in getting us there at this point. Like you
Yes,
have to think that.
and that's
And
good for him. Yeah,
yeah, let me actually have a couple more points about like his exit from Toronto as well, because I think that's sort of instructive around what we're getting here from Dragic. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. At that time of year, oh my gosh, the New Year's resolutions, they were getting to the end of February. Maybe you started letting them go. Not this year. Trying to stick with this stuff, trying to stick with those resolutions to eat right. Built Bar makes it a heck of a lot easier. They had the new puffs now. If you haven't tried these puffs, they're just like kind of like a compliment to the bars. It's a protein infused marshmallow. That sounds contradictory to what you heard about healthy stuff, but that's what they got with the puffs over there at Built Bar. Fluffy, they're marshmallow. They're not just a protein bar; they're actually just a treat, 100% covered in real chocolate. And they got the stats to back it up, because the Built Bar stats are second to none. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein, low calorie, high protein. You can replace the candy bars and some of those other garbagey snacks with the Built Bar, and know that you're sticking with those resolutions. Throw in the Flavors as well: mint brownie, coconut almond. That's just some of them. They got a new white chocolate cookies and cream. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com.
So as you say, hit the notes around leaving from Toronto before we talk
Okay, yeah.
about the rotation piece and where they could go.
So it's real quick. He had left early, he had left sometime around November because of personal reasons. And it was never really widely reported about what those were. I think it was probably, partly with playing time. Nick Nurse is like very starter heavy. So if you're not starting on that team, it is actually kind of hard to find minutes because those guys run as many minutes in the league with their starters. Guys like Van Vliet, OG, Pascal Siakam, they'll play 40 minutes a game. It's nuts. That's actually really rare in the NBA, and there's just not a path for it. I was not in a place that he originally, I don't think, wanted to go. He was part of the sign and trade for Lowry, so it was just kind of added as flotsam to this end of this trade to just get the salaries to move out to get Lowry in. So plus the Canadian piece, and then when you had COVID, I think there's a lot of reasons. Because if you're in Canada at the time, you couldn't do a single thing in Canada.
Yeah.
In terms of just overall freedom stuff. Now I'm putting this as stuff, right? I'm adding to the list of why this might not have been an ideal situation. Maybe none of that's true. I don't really know. It doesn't sound like landing in Toronto in November was the coolest place to ever land, right? Between all these other factors. So he leaves under personal reasons, not injury, which is important to know about why he has not been playing for this whole time, right? Because sometimes it's an injury thing and you're like, oh, what's going on? Is he going to have fresh legs at the age of 35? I don't know. We are less than 2 years of him being a very important part of what the Miami Heat were trying to do in the championship run against the Lakers. He was not the reason they lost, but when they lost him, they really lost something from that team. He was really important for what that Heat team was doing at the time, especially offensively. So, and he has not played that much since, right? He's really hasn't really taken the court. So I don't think we're getting a spring chicken here, but after a couple week ramp up, you have to think again. It's just another one of those, the Nets feel like they got away with something here. So I just wanted to go back through a little bit of the context around him over the last couple of years.
Very rare that you add two players who are both going to be fresh from not playing, not coming off injuries, just haven't been playing basketball and also looking good. And you hope you get the freshest version of them. The other thing is
Kyrie.
Right? Yeah. Good Lord. Yeah. We only want guys that haven't played bad. You take off 6 months at a minimum, and then come talk to us about.
I want guys
shape.
that have not played because of context. That's what I want.
No. Let me give you the context before you react here.
Explain it to you. This is why I haven't been playing.
By the way, whatever, because I'm 36 and Dragic is 35, and I always love when they're like, "Oh boy, he's getting long in the tooth." I'm like, I'm not long in the tooth. I'm not lifelong in the tooth, but your sports long in the tooth. No one's picking up my contract. The other thing is that I mentioned it before. I think this is important about, you saw Patty Mills hitting a bit of that slump around the perimeter in his shot leading into the All-Star break. I was pleasantly happy that he went out after one round of knocking down 21 points in the 3-point contest. I said, listen, buddy, why don't you go ahead and get it on back to Brooklyn? Just take it easy. But how do you then see these rotations fleshing out? Because we're projecting forward here a little bit. We still don't know exactly when Ben Simmons will get on the court. But do you think that you look at the second unit now and you say this is the Dragic, Patty Mills, LaMarcus Aldridge, etc., whoever else you want to mix in there with them kind of package? Or is Dragic going to be this 5-minute spurt player for them? And I guess I'll even add in too. When does he start playing? Because this is the other piece. Every time that this happens with Ben Simmons, with Kevin Durant coming after the injury, Nets fans keep saying so Thursday. And I consistently keep taking a pause and going, again, we're all assuming that they're racing to get onto the court here. There's going to be, you assume Dragic is in good shape, but is he in ready to go shape, step on the court and play whatever he plays? Now, you may actively ramp him up on the court, but as we've seen with Simmons, he didn't walk out there day one after the signing. And there's some reasons maybe why from a perceptual standpoint, but I don't know if any of these guys are going to play this week. It may not be until next week that we start to see them get on the court together.
Yeah, so we can know there's a little bit of something that came out. Ramona Shelburne reported about Ben Simmons that this was it was kind of good, but also a little disturbing. She had come on something this week, something today, and said Ben Simmons was closer to weeks away than months away. I was like, why did you even mention months? That was never why are we talking months? Like, who said months?
Ben
I thought
Simmons
we were always
very excited for next season. Hey.
like months, like the summer, like
Like, what are we
when the
talking?
season's over. Like,
Right.
so anyway, they think that's like maybe a couple weeks away. Dragic, you would think it's just a conditioning thing. Look, when you have not played basketball at a high level, you cannot, sure, unless like you're Kyrie Irving, kind of, who seems like he's sort of metahuman at this point when it
Yeah.
comes to like being able to just get back out there and play. Even he took a few weeks to kind of ramp back up into playing shape. Like, Dragic has not played since November. It's not gonna. It's not gonna happen this week. Like, he's not gonna come back. He's not gonna be on the floor starting after the All-Star break.
Right.
I don't think. I'd be shocked, and I'd be happy to be wrong about that. By the way, but I don't see that happening. I think we're probably a few games at least away. I think we're recording this Tuesday night. Excuse me, record this Monday night. I think by Wednesday we'll at least have a little bit more of a timeline on Dragic. Like, I think the team will be a little clear. I think they can be much more clear about his timeline than they can be about either Durant because of the injury or Ben Simmons because of the other stuff that he kind of has going on with him, right? Like, I think Dragic is very like A to B. He left because
Mhm.
of personal reasons. He was not injured. I think we're just gonna know, like, they're gonna give, and the Nets are usually terrible about this, so I'm probably giving him too much credit. But I think by the end of this week, they will give some kind of definitive timeline on him. And I wouldn't be shocked if it was a little sooner than later. I just don't think it's going to be like this first game out.
Who looks older, Steve Nash or Dragic? Just at a, if you
Steve Nash is like a classic. Like, even when he played, it's like, how old is he? He's got a very like I don't want to say odd because like that sounds like a pejorative, but he has a different kind of facial structure that it actually makes it
he looked
like a little.
old when he was young, but then it always just kind of, I think I get what you mean. It's like he always just looked that way, which wasn't
He's
really
got
an
like a
age
thin,
per
like kind of
se.
longer face. Like, I was actually thinking about this the other day because I was like, Steve Nash is like a really unique looking dude. I know that always makes it sound like you're taking a dig at somebody. Like, wow, you're so
Huh.
unique looking. Like, usually means like hashtag ugly. I don't mean that
Your
for
face has a lot of character to it.
character. Like, do you feel okay? Like, but no, I think that I think Nash looks older, but not by much. He's not only a few years older than him. Like, they played together in the league. Like, I know Nash was kind of on his way out at Phoenix at that point,
Yeah.
but anyway, I don't. I'm not off the rails.
Sorry,
I don't
no,
remember what we were
no,
talking about.
that's a bit of a derail in that question. But I think ultimately, like you said, happy to be wrong about it. But we had set this mid-March timeline for Kevin Durant. Simmons said that he wants to be there for the 10th against the 76ers, that revenge game that he wants to get to. But that's kind of, I think, right now, could it be a little bit sooner for Dragic? Sure. But if you told me I think they have a game on the 8th leading into that one, at least a game, maybe two ahead of that Philly game that Simmons is going to play. So he's ready to go. Maybe Dragic follows that timeline and then Kevin Durant is there or soon after. Like, I think that that's reasonable expectations. And again, in this, to cap off what they accomplished in the trade and after this buyout market, this is the idea of, and then as of the 15th, when we have 12 or 13 games left on the schedule, this is the, what do we need to accomplish to secure our playoff spot? How do we just integrate ourselves with one another a little bit and prepare to hit the ground running? I think the Nets are willing to sacrifice this short-term window, which, by the way, when you have Boston coming up, then the Bucks, you have Boston
Yeah,
again in a few games after
this is what I was just gonna say.
after a home and
Like
home against
this,
Toronto. There's no guarantee that, listen, you put Kevin Durant on the floor, you have a great chance to win every single game you play in. But there was no guarantee that this is the hardest stretch of their season,
oh
arguably,
yeah,
for them right now. So either way, this was going to be difficult. I'm almost of the mind of, if you're saying, yeah, we're going to punt on these next 7 games and then really dial it in, that's fine for me. I know fans don't want to hear that, but I think it's almost the safe play where you go, well, why don't we get healthy and acclimated to one another when we're also playing teams that you kind of feel like are pickup wins, walking in the door if everyone's on the court.
yeah, because they're catching some of these teams at just the wrong time. Like, Boston's look awesome.
Oh God, yeah.
They look just great. Milwaukee, like you said, Toronto in the back-to-back, Miami and then Boston again. Like, that's a very, very brutal stretch
Mhm.
against teams that definitely want to kill the Nets. Like,
Yeah.
they'd love to be part of the group that just like sent the Nets not part of the playoffs. Like, this is the hey, let's knock the Nets out of the playoff stretch for like these other teams for sure.
This is so funny that, because we were saying about entering this season, the target is on the Nets back. They're the big 3. Everybody's coming for them. Every team from top to bottom, you're going to get the best effort. That's why you're seeing some of these, quote, bad teams pick off the Nets in some of these wins. And now, even though it's a totally different team, it almost feels like the approach from the opposition is, You think you guys are just going to on the fly reload your roster and dial it back up for a playoff run? Like, and any of these teams, Boston, Milwaukee, Miami, if we can get a win against you and knock you out of the playoffs,
Well,
guess what we don't want to do is play you in the effing playoffs, right? Like, we want to avoid you. So everything that you can do to bury this team over the next 7 to 10 games is the agenda of any of these, 1 through 5, 6, 7 in the Eastern Conference right now.
For sure. Like you can see the one-to-one path of being like, hey, if we beat you now, there's like less of a chance we'll ever have to see you again. And like that is a pretty enticing offer, I think, from these teams. All right, we'll be back again. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the Nets can expect to come happen here out of the break. There's going to be some special shows in here where a bunch of other Locked On teams are going to talk about where they're stacking up against the Nets. That's going to be coming at you later on this week as well. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over to the YouTube channel and the podcast. Just unbelievable numbers. We can't say it enough. Adam and I are just like so humbled every single day. I say that with no hyperbole. Like we see these numbers every day. They've just skyrocketed in terms of what we've been doing earlier in the season to now. Adam and I just text about it. Like, do you see what these shows are doing? Like we're loving it. So go and subscribe over on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes.
When Steve Nash pitched Goran Dragic on joining the Brooklyn Nets, you know that he channeled the inner hero from another sport, but nevertheless just as applicable. Pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever. Shane Falco.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.